Public space is vital concerning many elements of life in the community. Many voices have many outlets that rely on space to house their activities. Unfortunately, not all voices in the community are heard. Many factors obstruct the agenda, and finding space open to all is difficult. Public parks and urban community spaces aren't always accessible to the community. Permits are required, and the facilities aren't developed considering multiple events. If a group wants to have a meeting, they may need access to power, a stage, and sheltered areas. Parks don't typically provide these, and to show up needing external elements would require expensive permits and permissions. Not to mention, not all groups are given a go, and the process can limit community members. The paperwork isn't always clear, and even when it is filled out correctly, the space is not always granted. When communities of oppressed groups challenge the historical narrative, whose relevance in societies is stilled by oppressive groups, this is called memory activism. Memory activism makes it possible for stories and cultural histories to have been forgotten, to gain relevance, and to be given a chance to be heard. Memory activism can be counterintuitive to the state's agenda or local authorities, and groups can have issues finding space to express their views. Historically, art and activism have been outlets for stories and histories of marginalized groups. There must be a space for all groups, and alternative narratives need a place to live. Autonomous geographies and temporary urban spaces become the place of community members who are marginalized and working against the common thread of historical accounts. Protests, temporary meeting spaces, and renegade uses of space have tactically formed around the community issues. Spaces such as squats offer a place for community members to operate peacefully without having to draw in funding and permission from the government. An example is Squat City. Squat City was a repurposed building in Dublin that had taken over a space that had gone unused for 15 years plus. The space became a foundational hub for many community members. They offered a meeting place for the community, a space to work on bikes, a ballroom, a free shop, and an arts and crafts room. This space operated uniquely in Dublin and left behind a legacy. The temporal nature of a squat, or temporal urban solutions, may seem to those that operate in the conventional norms of public space temporary and hard to depend on. This subject is further explored and considered a cultural offshoot and perspective. More spaces like these, more spaces for community, and the use of open neglected spaces are needed. This is just another form of culture. Art and spaces for art can play a vital role in developing the community and broadcasting the voices and initiatives of marginalized groups. Art and spaces to create art can also act as places for community members to work conceptually to challenge oppositional narratives and explore the narratives of others. This work and the output of artists helps to develop the community and conceptualize marginalized cultural elements. When the community gains control of the narrative, it is represented through art and public space. And the byproducts of these elements are murals, art shows, and community events. They work to germinate outside the common sphere, which is oppressive and forces false depictions of the community's scope. Temporary autonomous zones like Squat City offer an effective solution for supplementing artists and community members of marginalized groups. Tactical solutions are equally effective as political involvement and work towards change. It can be seen how each person's political participation, access, and autonomy in public space work hand in hand and give strength to one another. Because the nature of the space proper is transient, it can be effective to move to areas of need, along with help from members of previous spaces. Breaking from the typical structure of long-lasting buildings that are promoted would change the effectiveness, especially for a phenomena that has the ability to sprout up around a community utilizing unused space. Public spaces are powerful places for the community, so powerful that when they are absent, even without considerable community support, they form anyway. There are many writings on marginalized groups and analysis of the culture around oppression. Awareness is constantly on the agenda of many active members of the community, and even at the state level in politics. Autonomous spaces and temporary urban spaces may be a new norm. When so many commercial spaces and storefronts close down, and parks and public areas go abandoned, there's less public space for the community, and more space becomes available. The community's energy and the individuals' voices seem to sprout up. Community centers that work within what is provided will be needed, and we can imagine that we can hear more about them and find ways to help support our community in the future. In the last part of the presentation, I would like to encourage you to take a walk around your neighborhood, to notice what kinds of spaces exist for people and how spaces that are there are being used. Are there any storefronts that are empty? Are there any parks that are commonly empty? Do you see any opportunities in your community for space to be open for public events? Do you see a way that the space will be used in the future, or can you imagine different elements of culture that will need space in the future? Hopefully my presentation has helped you to imagine the use of space and the way space can be used in the community.